What's happening, guys? This is Logan Robinson from He the Spear, presenting to you by NoleGameday.com. We're here live on a wonderful, fantastic Wednesday evening, and Dustin just arrived back home after not really attending practices, but attending the press conference afterward, hearing from Mike Norvell. Also got to hear from Cam Davis and also Justin Cryer, Florida State linebacker as well. So going to get his thoughts on what he heard from Mike after the first day of spring practice. We're also going to talk about Mike Norvell's opening presser to spring camp. Also, you, along with the rest of our staff, got a chance to speak with a lot of the staff at the luncheon. So going to pick y'all's brains, or pick your brains, since we don't have Austin on here with us. He's got a Mavericks game to cover. But still, nonetheless, we're going to talk a lot about spring ball, some of those interviews too. We're going to talk about some of those weight changes. You know, I've got it listed down, Dustin. I've got it all notched down, some significant changes for some guys losing weight, guys adding weight, and some of them that they some that really stood out to me, to be honest with you, that I was kind of shocked by. But we'll get to that later on in this episode. But before we get started, as always, you can listen to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. If you're on YouTube right now, smack that like button. We'll be here for you all throughout spring. I know it's going to be a little bit different, and we'll discuss it about media not being allowed at the practices, but still, nonetheless, the show goes on here, and we're going to do our best to give you some coverage on a day-to-day basis at NoleGameday.com. With me this evening is our editor-in-chief at that site, Dustin Lewis. First day of spring, did it feel like it? And, thoughts on just a little bit of a change here going around FSU as a whole with media, man.
Yeah, very anticlimactic, compared to years past, not actually being able to attend the practice. You can still be out there and film Mike Norvell, the coaches, the players coming in, but then the door is shut and we are on the outside. And yeah, today, obviously really just the availability of Mike Norvell, Cam Davis, and Justin Cryer, like you mentioned, and it's going to be like that for majority of the spring, and we will get one opportunity to watch Florida State scrimmage in a couple weeks. That date is TBD, but looking forward to actually being able to chance to put your eyes on this football team. Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it is a different world that we're going to have to get used to a little bit since the very beginning. Mike Norvell opening things up to the media, being able to be at those practices. Yes, still very strict, though, from the SIDs, the PR team, on what we could be putting out there. A lot of it was the positives, Dustin. Yes, you could be critical on a few things, but couldn't go too far. Obviously, you couldn't talk about injuries, who's starting, what's the depth chart looking like, all that kind of stuff. And in those practice reports, a lot of them were just about good things happening in the practices. So yes, you lose out on not being able to have those reports out there. And also too, it just, at least for this show, it kind of stinks because you're giving us insight of what you're seeing at the practices. And be honest with you, though, last year it was below average on below average, and we didn't really find that out until a couple weeks, maybe not even a couple weeks into the season. We kind of figured out how this team was going to perform throughout the rest of the season. But in this regard, it's going to be a lot of trying to, source out a lot of things and try to get some info and intel back like the good old days. And it definitely sucks for us because where's our TikTok views going to go and our Instagram views going to go? That sucks, man. I can't get these guys walking in.
No, we can. We can get them walking in.
Yeah, I guess we can still take those videos.
After that, not really. So no more of the cone drills.
No more cone drill, man. Golly, FSU fans are going to riot at the more.
No more stretching videos, no more Mike Norvell races. You know what? I think that's probably the real reason he wanted to shut us out, because he knows he's slowing down a little bit. He's going to lose more races than normal. He didn't want that on film. So,
yeah, I've been dying to know who Mike Norvell raced today. I'm going to lose my mind if I don't figure it out. But yeah, no. Well, we adjust over here. It's definitely going to be interesting to see if this moves forward going into the fall without allowing any of the media there. And I don't think it came too much of a shock from us. We discussed it on here. We thought it would definitely be a little bit more limited. But, thinking about Gus Malzahn, a guy that shut things down during his time at Auburn there at the end, and then also UCF, like he likes to keep things tight. And I don't think it was too much of a shocker there that he probably went to Mike and said, why are we allowing media here. But, I want to bring up the statement from Mike Norvell talking about this, because I want to bring up the point that he doesn't think, last year, 2-10, that's not the media's fault on that
Why would
happening.
it be?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it would be on us, but he says in his statement here, saying, as I evaluated every aspect of our program this offseason, I came to the decision that the majority of this year's spring practices will not be open to the media. That's a pretty interesting part there. Just the majority of this year's spring practices. I guess he's just alluding to maybe the one spring
14
scrimmage
out
that we're
of
going to get.
15 is majority.
Yeah, guess so. In my first 5 seasons here, we provided unmatched access to the members of the media to observe practices during the spring, preseason camp, and game weeks. I appreciate and respect the media's role in telling the stories of the people in our program and keeping our fans informed. In a day and age where so many people have access to our players, I want to create an atmosphere free of outside perspectives during our time of preparation and development. The availability of our program in terms of post-practice media opportunities and individual requests for players, coaches, and staff members will remain the same. This is not a suggestion that I think last season's record had anything to do with media members observing our practices, especially after we won 19 games in a row in 2022 and 2023 with media at practice. However, this is the best decision for our program at this time. Dustin, you were a big-time distraction at those practices. I mean, point to Odell Higgins. He was tired of you going over there and filming him. We talked about it on here plenty of times. He finally, I guess Mike Norvell said, no more, Dustin, no more cameras.
Apparently so, but like you said, it kind of felt like it was trending towards this way of them limiting access. I don't know that I expected it to be totally cut down to this aspect where we're only able to see the team one time, before preseason camp begins in July. And they said they're going to reevaluate things then. I think you brought that up as well.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we're able to get back out there in the fall and for game weeks and stuff. But, it just feels like once you get something taken away, it's not necessarily likely to come back. But yeah, I agree with your sentiment for the most part. I think the addition of Gus Malzahn, then you look at the coaches coming in from Nebraska. Nebraska also didn't have practices to the media. And I mean, frankly, Florida State switching up the offensive style a little bit, switching up the defensive scheme. And I can see from their perspective how they wouldn't want necessarily to have those distractions and to have people in there commenting on the offensive defense and an in-depth way, written about and that sort of magnitude, and just kind of want to focus on themselves for now. And, I could see, depending on how things go, we get back out there in July. But I mean, at the same time, I don't think the fan base really cares that much if the media is at practice or not. At the end of the day, this is about Florida State winning football games. And if they're able to respond next year and start getting back to where they were in 2022 and 2023, whether the media is allowed to attend practice or not, that's not going to matter very much in the eyes of fans. They just want to see Florida State dominate on Saturdays. And, I can understand it from that perspective as well. And if Mike Norvell thinks this is the best decision, it's just where we're at. But, from a personal view, definitely disappointing for me because, you like to go out there and watch the practices and kind of get a feel for how players are performing and not just, the starters and 2D, but also the freshmen, like how are these guys progressing? And, you're able to come up with some interesting storylines out of that. And when you do get to the press conference, you can ask more in-depth questions because you actually had your eyes a little bit on things. And we'll just kind of see how it goes from here, but certainly going to be different.
Mm-hmm. Certainly will be. But yeah, I think too, the one thing that I would, I don't know, I'm kind of critical on with FSU is, it's stated in here, getting the availability of players for interviews outside of, outside of practices and interviews with coaches. And yes, we have those introductory interviews when they first arrive and everything. But, when you go through a camp like this or you go through a fall camp, we're pressing, and sending some emails to try to garner those interviews that we could bring on our shows that I think a lot of FSU fans enjoy. Yes, we've had a few of them on here, but it's very, 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 very hard in order to do that, for that to come to light. The stars have to align. And now it feels like it's going to be very distant. The players are going to be very distant, and also to the coaching staff as well. And that, that's fine. Now they don't get to control narrative on the things, and it allows for us to kind of figure things out on our own and cover it the way that we are going to cover it. But that's just how it goes, and it's not nothing new. A lot of these coaches lock things down, and that's how it works well for them. But yeah, just an interesting change there, and we'll see if that ends up going through into the fall. But nonetheless, here we still got a practice to talk about. You spoke with Mike Norvell afterward today. Interested to get your thoughts of anything that stood out to you. We'll talk about the spring practice first and some of the players spoke with, but then we'll jump into his Mike Norvell's introductory press conference talking about the spring, which I have an interesting take on as well. But what stood out to you? I'll bring up your tweets here too, and we'll kind of go through a few things and some players that he brought up after day one.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me that jumped off the page immediately is, we're going to get into it. Mike Norvell earlier this week announced some guys are going to begin the spring limited or even out in some cases, and he gave us a couple names that we'll discuss later on. But he did say that running back Jalen Lucas is back on the field after suffering that season-ending injury last September in Florida State's second game of the season. And, he attacked the rehab process, vigorously, and has gotten himself back into condition, back into shape, where he was able to get on the field in day one for Florida State in spring camp. And what I also thought was interesting about that is Mike Norvell was asked, is Jalen Lucas going to continue to be utilized as a running back? Is he going to be a wide receiver? And Mike Norvell referred to him as an athlete. And I think that just says, they're going to be using this guy all over the field, figure out if he can go and at running back, in the slot. We'll see if he's able to get back into special teams work, coming off of this injury. But he's someone, that adds a very versatile and athletic weapon to that Florida State running back room that, is still filled with a lot of talent, obviously looking to bounce back in 2024. And then he was also, very high on the defensive backfield. Brought up a number of guys, including Jabril Rawls, Earl Little Jr., Edwin Joseph, and Ricky Knight. He feels like Earl Little Jr. definitely has taken that next step. Said that Edwin Joseph continued to make a leap during tour of duty and offseason work, coming in really good shape. And Jabril Rawls actually had an interception today in 7-on-7. So, a couple, younger DBs and a guy who's now an upperclassman and Earl Little Jr. standing out on day one. He mentioned Thomas Castellanos and Brock Glenn, going back and forth a little bit, said those guys are competitive. They're pushing each other in that quarterback room. And both trying to bring the best out of one another. And then also said that true freshman Kevin Sperry, in his first official practice at Florida State, stepped right in and went 4 for 4 during his first 7-on-7 action. So, it sounds like Florida State definitely had some promising flashes from a couple of guys out there on Wednesday.
I want to stick here with the quarterbacks because that is the most important position in football. Kevin Sperry, if you go back and look at some of his film in high school, this guy plays with a lot of confidence. And, I wish we could have seen it today. But going 4 for 4 here in his 7-on-7, that's impressive. Going back to some previous practices when things start, you definitely see the true freshman effect for them when they reach the collegiate level, that things are definitely tough and not easy to do. But for Sperry, going back, looking at film, this guy, to me, not saying he's going to be a Baker Mayfield, but the way that he represents himself and the style of play, extremely physical, a guy that will utilize his legs as well. But to see him go 4 for 4 in a 7-on-7 at this level is a good sign to see. And two, also, we discussed it last week, about Brock Glenn being behind, Thomas Castellanos, but you want to see Glenn push, man. Like, you want to see him push Castellanos as far as it goes, and that's only healthy for that quarterback room because Castellanos, he can't feel comfortable that he's just going to win that job. Brock Glenn has been in this system for a long time. Yes, I know Gus Malzahn's coming in as a new offensive coordinator, but still, he knows these guys. He has good chemistry with these weapons, and I think it's very healthy for a quarterback room to have some competition there. And to see Sperry, though, have a nice start to spring ball is a good sign to see, I think.
And as we know, with Brock, that's a guy, he's got that mentality. He's a grinder. He puts in a lot of work. And, he's someone that's not going to count himself out to go out and win this starting job for Florida State in 2025. So, like you said, Logan, I mean, if these guys can just continue to push each other, draw the best out of one another, that's going to be huge for Florida State's quarterback room when you're talking about a position where you need a major, major resurgence in 2025. And Thomas Castellanos, I mean, it seems like he's here to do that, and he's taken things by the reins so far, but we'll see how it continues to go during spring. And yeah, I mean, also, like you said, Kevin Sperry, a true dual threat quarterback who had very good junior and senior seasons, coming off a senior year where he led his team into a deep run in the playoffs. And, it seems like he's got a lot of potential, carries himself with high confidence, and has come into Florida State already kind of jumped into the mix a little bit and learning this offense. And I feel like, with what Gus Malzahn likes to do with his quarterbacks, as far as having them be a little bit more athletic, able to move around, use their legs, and also throw the ball downfield as well, Kevin Sperry kind of fits into that mold.
He does. Going back to this defensive back room and the quote that you got, and Mike Norvell showing this room a lot of love. Now it's coached, the safety room, coached by Evan Cooper, and then also to Coach Sertan, working with those cornerbacks and nickels. To me, seeing some of these younger guys find the strides, but one that points out, though, out of this kind of list, because I think we expected to see hopefully a jump from guys like Rawls and Joseph, and Ricky Knight is one that I pointed out last year. Wasn't going to see a whole ton of action, but I'm high on that young kid as well. So looking forward to hopefully being able to talk about him more as we go throughout this spring window. But Earl Little Jr. is someone that I think, to us, and we'll see if things change, but we're kind of like, maybe that's someone monitored that, if he sticks here in Tallahassee or moves on, just interested to see. But seems like Tony White, whenever he was hired, he made it a focus on trying to figure out which personnel should end up staying. And he did that with Daryl Jackson and Omar Graham Jr., guy that took himself out of the transfer portal. But Earl Little Jr. is still sticking around here, and just looking through some of the tour of duty and just the way that he's shaped up his body and stuff, it seems like he's looked good so far to begin spring, to get some praise from Mike Norvell.
But yeah, I agree with that. I saw a picture of him earlier today, the Florida State being up there at the Capitol for, I think, Florida State Day or something like that. I hope I'm not getting it wrong. But Earl Little Jr. was up there, and he definitely looks like he's added some muscle and some size to his frame. And, this was a guy who, I mean, let's be real about it. He struggled during that 2024 season, especially when he was at cornerback. And then once they moved him to safety, it seemed like he started to figure things out a little bit more. And now you go into this defensive scheme where you basically got three safeties on the field in the majority of situations. Earl Little Jr., with that growth that he displayed in the back half of last fall, he's putting himself in a position to earn some trust from Tony White and Evan Cooper. So we'll see how it goes. Definitely going to be an important spring for him. And I mean, a lot of those defensive backs, I don't think, obviously you're losing AZ, you're losing Fentrell, you're losing some other guys out of that defensive backfield. You've got Shaheem Brown coming back, but he's dealing with that injury and going to be out for the spring. Same with Conrad Hussey. So there are starting jobs, I mean, to start working yourself towards earning over these next 15 practices. And then, I mean, really lock it down once fall camp arrives. In Florida State, I mean, they've got a lot of young but extremely talented guys in the mix at cornerback and at safety. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this competition shakes out, because Mike Norvell, I mean, he said they're all going at it right now.
Love it. Love it. All about it. Two, I want to note on Cam Davis here, and he's going to be one that we point out weight changes, because I think it's someone that needed to do some work with his body, eliminate and try to trim down some. But Mike Norvell said today, Cam Davis has done a good job doing that, working with his body and taking that next leap. I think to us, him going down, I believe, yes, it was from 224 pounds to 217. He's just a guy that loves the weight room. I mean, I wonder how that conversation went with Coach Storms. Like, I need you to get out of there. I need to get you out. I need you running more. I need you just to slim up a little bit more. But it's someone that, the staff still feels very high on, and someone that they want to continue to see take big steps moving forward. The one thing that we were doing when we previewed him, Dustin, and we saw it on film, is just missing some of those holes in his vision. If he can improve that, that will help a ton also too, with the addition of working on his body. But a lot of the chatter has been about Rodell Williams, and seems like maybe Gus is leaning that way to start off with. But, Cam Davis, I mean, he got thrown into the fire last year as a true freshman. He's got that college experience already. He's got that under his belt. Now it's, take the next step, worked on his body, work on his vision, and hopefully, too, a new offensive line can help any kind of running back moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, the coaches are confident he can take the next step. You can see on the quote here, Mike Norvell said about Davis, he's one that I've challenged to go and take a step, and they want to see it starting this spring. And I think Cam Davis, he did a very good job during offseason conditioning and tour of duty, like you said, Logan, shedding about 7 pounds, and being up and close and personal with him today after Mike Norvell's press conference and getting a chance to interview him. He's still got that big body, obviously. I mean, that's a guy that's carrying a lot of muscle on his frame, but a little bit more refined, maybe a little bit more trimmed up, and going to be interesting to see if that brings out some of the more speediness and athleticism that he's got in his game and that we saw in practice sometimes last season. So, I mean, he's a guy in a very deep running back room, and that's another one where Florida State, there's going to be so much competition for that starting job and to be in that rotation. Cam Davis, I mean, doing his part to get himself in the mix. He actually, spoke with us and talked about getting into better shape and his mentality after already being at Florida State for 1 year. He kind of knows what to expect and, is ready for 2025. And he said, the guys, they haven't forgotten that 2024 season and still hopping on social media and seeing criticism from fans and about how bad Florida State is. He's definitely got a chip on his shoulder, and he wants to be a part in getting Florida State back to the successful heights that it was at just a couple of seasons ago.
Mm-hmm. I thought there was a pretty strong quote here, and we'll finish off this unless you have any kind of other notes here from some takeaways from after the practice. But strong quote from Mike Norvell on the addition of Gus Malzahn as his new offensive coordinator, saying, "I think I've got the best offensive coordinator in college football." That's strong, maybe because Chip Kelly left, and maybe that's why.
That's the quote. That's the quote. That's what he said.
But yeah, that is the quote. But I thought that was a pretty strong one there, because as we know, play calling duties, all of that now goes over in the favor of Gus Malzahn, and that's why one of the things that I would have loved to see is how practices were going to be working there with Mike. I don't know if it would change a whole ton because Dustin, and I was there with you too as well for a few years. Mike's very hands-on in a lot of different groups. He's not just stuck behind the quarterbacks. He's not just stuck behind the wide receivers or doing things with them hands-on the offensive side. But he'll let you know if things are going wrong on the defensive side of the ball as well. Or if you make a play too, he's over there giving you energy, giving you love, giving you a hug, jumping on you, all that kind of stuff. And if it's on the negative side, well, he's a coach and he is going to coach you up as it should be. But, I think I would have loved to just kind of see how things are working throughout the practices. Mike, I believe, did mention, adjusting with the new coaching staff coming in. That's something that I'm sure, good thing they have spring. It's something to adjust to because Mike Norvell hasn't really had to do a big job of that. Now with a whole big landslide of changes on the coaching staff, he said, "I was pleased with the coaches today. I thought it was a good start. There will be some things we definitely need to clean up, but we'll get better as we get out there tomorrow." So some adjustments all across the board, not only with the players and such, but, it goes over to the coaching staff too. And I would imagine too, some changes in those practices, and interested to see if we could or start hearing out of these practices what actually ended up changing, if there were any changes. But I would expect it with 2 new coordinators coming in, and you went 2-10. You have to change things. It's mandatory. It's necessary. You have to.
Yeah, new coordinators, new position coaches, new off-field staff members on, all 3 sides of the football, offense, defense, and special teams. It's a lot different at Florida State, and I think that's one of the parts that sucks about not being able to go to most of these practices is that we're not really seeing, is the formatting changed a little bit, how they do things and the different drills that they're doing and stuff, has that altered a little bit with these new coaches coming in? And just how exactly are they running the ship out there, and how are the players responding? The guys that were here previously, how are they responding now to how they're being coached based off how it was going a couple of months ago? So it does suck to miss out on those aspects, but we'll just see. I think whenever we do get back out there, or when we get that one chance later this spring, it's probably going to look a lot different from the last time.
100%. So we're going to do a lot of these kind of recaps from practices when days align and such. Then we'll have kind of some notes taken from these practices also, and make sure you're staying tuned to NoleGameday.com. We'll be having some stories out afterward as well from some of these interviews. But show goes on. We'll try to give you the best coverage as we can. I know we're not at the practices inside of the IPF, but just like Mighty Nole said, please just keep it real with us this year, fellas, and we're going to try to do our best, because I understand the unhappiness from last year. It just kind of came to a shock to everybody. It wasn't just people on the beat here locally. It happened nationally, and trust me, those guys have sources as well. They do their due diligence too at their profession. And yeah, it was an utter shock of what we saw, and just happened to be below average on below average at practices. And you can still make plays when you're at below average on below average. But when you face average on Saturdays, you're going to lose. And that's exactly what happened last year. But here's the deal. We've moved on from them, and now we're on to a new season into 2025. So Dustin, you and our NoleGameday staff, they were at the media luncheon after Mike Norvell's pressers. Any major takeaways from that presser? My take on it was bleh. I mean, there was just nothing there from that at all. A lot different than what we've seen previously. Let's be honest. I mean, Mike would always come up, some high energy, trying to get you going and everything. And yes, because you had some excitement going into into the next season. I don't think there is a lot of that drive yet from at least the fan base yet, and maybe the media side still as well. Also, too, the media did get the news that the practices were going to be on lockdown like just 30 minutes before the presser began. So the media probably wasn't even in the good mood either way. But, I think the biggest takeaway from the presser is that he talks a lot about accountability. And I think that's always the biggest key for having success on a football team, is showing accountability, and not just not just the player side, but also needs to be held with your coaching staff as well. And there was not a lot of accountability being held from Mike Norvell to the rest of his coaching staff, something that he's got to improve on moving forward. But, there's just nothing really that stuck out. I'll, mention the players that are going to be out for this spring. Dustin, yeah. Jason Jenkins, Tennessee transfer defensive end, Shaheem Brown, and Conrad Hussey. I wish Austin was on here, because he'd say, I'm going to freak out. There's no safety room anymore. But those three players will be fully out of this spring. And then there should be two guys that have a chance to return, and that's Gunnar Hansen and Jalen Early. What were your first impressions from that presser, D-Lou?
I agree with you for the most part. Pretty bland. I mean, the most interesting thing was probably the injury news, and then Mike Norvell also talked about Mekhi Danzy and BJ Gibson, and kind of mentioned that their participation in the offseason program and stuff has been a little bit sporadic, as those guys play their other two sports. Danzy obviously running track. Just recently completed the indoor season, but the outdoor season is about to begin. It sounds like he's going to be continuing to run with the track team, but he was out there on Wednesday for Florida State's first spring practice, and something, he's, as we learned on Monday officially, he's going to be making that conversion from running back to wide receiver, and Mike Norvell, said that he was getting that work in on Wednesday. So we'll see how that goes. And BJ Gibson actually was not with the team. And I think the baseball team is preparing to play a game or begin a series on Thursday. So he was not at practice today. So that'll be something to watch, to kind of see when those two are available to be out there and how much work they're able to put in on the football side. Because, Mekhi Danzy, obviously elite speed, and if Florida State figures out how to utilize that correctly, he could be very dangerous out there. And then BJ Gibson, I thought he showed some real flashes as a true freshman. And this was someone who earned a lot of props. Started out on the scout team, and then, by the end of the season had worked himself into the 2-deep over some of those other true freshmen, like Elijah Moore and stuff. So he's someone that I think could have a bright future, and we'll see what he decides to do, mixing up football and baseball. But I mean, just going back to the injuries, definitely sucks for Florida State not to have Gunnar Hansen out there. We'll see. Well, we won't see, but hopefully we'll hear when exactly he's able to return to the field.
You have to get used to that. You have to get used to that one.
Florida State starting projected starting left tackle. And, it's obviously a guy you want out there to get as much work as possible with the amount of transfers and new faces Florida State has coming into that room under new position coach Herb Hand, developing chemistry and cohesion and I mean trust with one another is a huge part of a successful offensive line. So I mean they need as much reps together as they can, and then not having Shaheem Brown for what sounds like the entirety of the spring. I wasn't at practice, so I'm guessing I can say this, but I saw Shaheem Brown walking around campus after practice, and I mean he didn't look visibly hampered to me. So I'm sure we won't get any specifics on the injury, but hopefully, and Mike Norvell did say all of those guys that he mentioned will be available for the 2025 season, and this doesn't sound like stuff that's going to be too long term. But after the 2024 season where Shaheem Brown recorded a career high in tackles, but maybe didn't necessarily have the performance that we expected him to have. He needs to rebound, and it starts obviously going to be out for the spring, but seeing what he can do and learning this new scheme under Tony White and Evan Cooper, still having Pat Surtain back there in that defensive backfield, and also continuing to step up as a leader, because this is a guy who's been at Florida State for a long time. He's a veteran, and the Seminoles need him to get back on that upward trajectory he was on just a couple of seasons ago.
100%. Going back to Gunnar Hansen, definitely important there to build that chemistry and start there. Definitely, Castellanos there as QB1. That position at left tackle is going to be very important. But okay, Gunnar Hansen's out. Now it gives some younger guys to get some really true good development there and some experience, I should say. And I should say now I can say development. Herb Hands now as the offensive line coach, there is going to be some development. But like a guy like Lucas Simmons, right, D-Lou, because I feel like the size, he's got the size there. He's actually, we'll talk some weight changes and such. But a guy that just has all the physical attributes, I think it's going to be good for a guy like him to have that experience throughout the spring. I mean, he's going to be working with the ones I would imagine, unless they have someone else over there that we don't know of, but we'll just have to try to get some scoop on that. But, for some younger guys, I think that's important. But Conrad Hussey, too, not being there, one that we were hoping to see to take the next step, get some more work in after a disappointing second season with the Seminoles. But Jason Jenkins, something that we kind of knew a little bit. We knew for a good while that was going to be happening. It still seems like he's going to be good to go for the fall. It seems like, because we heard
based on what Norvell said, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So,
and I will just add real quick, during his interview, he actually had a boot on his lower leg. So we'll see how quickly he's able to respond from that. But, like you were just about to bring up, during his interview, he said that he's going to be good for the season. Mike Norvell said that Florida State, as of now, has not suffered any injuries. They're going to keep players out into the 2025 season. So, we'll continue to check on the health of this team over the next couple of weeks, especially, once they put the pads on, I guess, next Tuesday.
Yeah, shells, baby. Don't get to see Micah Pettis and some guys talking and chirping. I know I was like, Dustin, please go over there for the trenches when the pads come on. Not going to happen.
Don't make me cry on the live.
All right, let's keep moving here. We got to talk weight changes. It's the best time of the year, and we've got some weight changes. It's in the spring, too, so that it just means more in the spring as well. But we were just talking about him, D-Lou, but Cam Davis goes from 224 to 217, a 7-pound difference there, trimming up. And Roydell Williams putting on some pounds here from 214 to 221, adding 7 pounds. So, seeing that running back room, some fluctuations there. They're trying to, they're trying to see what they can do with Cam trimming up a little bit and Roydell. But, I would not be shocked to see, where, Gus Malzahn, he really likes those two, and we'll see a lot of both probably this upcoming season. But, in prior years, I mean, look at RJ Harvey, who's, he was just there at the combine after being with Gus at UCF. Go check out that stat line. Absolutely ridiculous, but it's because he was your bell cow in that room. And now there's a whole assortment of running backs. Going over to the tight end, though, there's a handful of guys that I wanted to point out. Randy Pittman, the UCF transfer tight end, goes from 225 to 237, a 12-pound increase. Interested to get your thoughts on that one. D-Lou. Landon Thomas, 235 to 239, 4-pound increase there. I think that's something that I think we'll continue to see rise a little bit before fall begins. Amari Williams, 219 to 230. I could see that. That was pretty significant growth I saw in some of those videos of those guys walking in, but he has 11-pound increase. And then Marquiston Douglas Biscuit, 275 down to 270, a 5-pound difference. I know we spoke with him. He was working on his body still and wanted to trim up a little bit as well before spring. But out of these guys, like, what kind of stands out to you the most?
It's a good looking tight end room. I mean, Marquiston Douglas at that 270-pound mark, and you think previously he was probably closer to that 285, 290 range whenever he was at Florida State. I mean, that's why he's nicknamed Biscuit, but certainly in the best shape of his college career, you know, entering his final season of eligibility. And that'll be something to watch because he talked about wanting to be more involved as a receiving threat. And I think with him trimming down a little bit, and we've seen him in practice, I mean, he makes some standout one-handed catches. This is a guy who can get after the football, and if he can get a little bit lighter and that makes him move a little quicker, that could be good for Florida State. Randy Pittman, interesting to see him go up to 237 pounds. I think we talked about a little bit. You know, he's going to be all over that offense, get some time at H-back, at tight end, maybe even there in the slot, and he's going to be a versatile weapon. So, I mean, we'll see how that treats him during the spring, and if Florida State likes him at that weight. I will say I really like Landon Thomas getting up to that 240-pound mark, mainly because we talked about he needs to get better as a blocker, and I think having that extra strength, muscle, bulk, I mean, that's going to help him continue to go in the right direction. That was something whenever I spoke to Chris Thompson at the luncheon that he was really excited about Landon Thomas being at 240 pounds. And Amari Williams, I mean, putting on a significant amount of weight as well. You look at a picture of this guy now compared to a year ago, and you're like, man, is that the same dude? I mean, he's definitely had some physical developments, and I think that's what you expect. You know, when a guy like Amari Williams gets on campus, he's only 17 years old. He's the youngest player on Florida State's roster. And then, you know, what was it, 5 or 6 games in? I mean, this guy's getting on the field. Next thing you know, he's in the rotation, even starting games and catching touchdowns out there. So
Yeah.
He's got a ton of potential. I will say, not to get off track of the weight changes, but Chris Thompson noted that Amari Williams is going to be spending a lot of time on defense during the spring just so that he can learn that side of the ball more, learn Tony White's scheme, but then he's also going to be getting some looks on offense as well. But it sounds like a lot of that time is going to be focused on defense. At the same time, you know, Chris Thompson doesn't think that Amari Williams is necessarily going to end up being tied down to one position, and think there's an opportunity for him to play both ways in 2025.
Now, the funny thing is he said, Amari Williams said in an interview last year, I think after a practice, saying that he wants to play both ways. He said he wants to be the next Travis Hunter. He said that specifically to the media. So he's pulling for it. He wants to play on both sides of the ball. So that would be pretty unique to see him in a game if he does go offense to defense. I hope he doesn't really have to do that. I hope that in a position groups, things are solidified down a little bit, because if he's coming in, then either he's a stellar guy that's great for you in the third down pass rush, or something went bad in your depth there. But still, it would be pretty cool to see that. But yeah, this tight end room is really impressive on paper with it, and it's going to be interesting to see what Gus Malzahn puts together. He has that, you know, having that familiarity with Randy Pittman is strong. But, you know, too, just understanding what you also have all across the board. You also have a true freshman that this staff is really high on with Chase Lofton, too. So, you know, if you want to go back and listen to our spring preview, we're just talking a lot of what we did last week. But this room put on some size here, and, you know, Biscuit lost some pounds, and that's something that he most certainly is wanting to do. And I wouldn't be surprised maybe if they kind of stick him at around and stick with that 270 mark, because that's practically where he played at whenever he was at FSU previously. So, yeah, interested to see how that continues to work out there. I pointed out to Dustin, a wide receiver now, Mekhi Danzy. Not a massive thing to really point out that he put on 4 pounds. How did he put on 4 pounds running track? How is this happening? How in the world is this happening? This man put on 4 pounds. I think it's impressive as hell. It means that he's putting in really consistent work in the weight room, or maybe I just don't know how that's possible. Just coming from a running track, I didn't run at the collegiate level, but like high school level, I mean, it's hard as hell to even maintain weight. But the fact that he put on 4 pounds just goes to show this guy's working his tail off, both on the track and in the weight room too.
They've got him on that weight gainer plan, I guess.
And
That's
it's
the only
crazy
thing.
gaining 4 pounds and you're killing it on the
Yeah.
track. It's really
Yeah, add
impressive,
in the
man.
4 pounds and still tying for the third best 400-meter time in Florida State history as a freshman.
Yeah. Very impressive. Very impressive. Let's go over to the offensive line, going into the trenches here. Lucas Simmons, as I had just mentioning earlier, he went from 308 to 315, a 7-pound increase there. And then Micah Pettis just gets bigger, and he's just giant. He went from 350 to 355. That can be easily. I know. I mean, it's going to shed off here in camp a little bit for these guys still, though some of these guys are on plans to still continue to try to garner and gain more weight, but it's tougher to do whenever you are in these camps, and that it's going to get a little bit harder. It's going to get a little bit warmer, and, you're going to trim up a little bit. But, yeah, Micah Pettis up to 355. That is your projected right tackle starter. But Lucas Simmons, your starter right now in the spring. I love that we can just say this now. We're not at the practices, but Lucas Simmons, likely going to be a starter guy throughout the spring, adding 7 pounds. D-Lou.
I mean, first off, Micah Pettis. I mean, that is just absolutely insanity at 355 pounds. Obviously 6'7", but I mean, that amount of weight to be playing at is crazy. But then you look at the videos of him walking into practice today, and you're like, wow. I mean, that doesn't look like a guy who's out of shape. I mean, he looks like he's carrying that 355 pounds around pretty damn well. And we'll see if Florida State, if they want him to trim up a little bit ahead of actually getting to the season. But man, I wish we were out there to watch that guy going up against the defensive line each day. And then, yeah, I mean, Lucas Simmons, missed a lot of his first season at Florida State. Contributed mostly in practice last year in the 2-deep a little bit, but I mean, didn't get on the field very much for FSU. So this is an important spring for him. And you already knew he was a developmental guy coming into Florida State, but I think seeing these consistent strides that he's been able to make with his body, getting up to 315 pounds, still looking like he's in pretty good shape, that should help him as he tries to take that next step and, really unlock his potential beginning this spring under Herb Hand, who, like you said, Logan, is a developer of talent. And, Lucas Simmons is a guy with a vast ceiling if he has a coach that can get him there. And Herb Hand, we'll see if he's the one that's able to do that.
Before we jump into defensive line, which if we're going to talk weight changes, holy mother of God, there's a lot of changes in this room. But hit that like button. We've got tons of coverage coming to you all throughout spring camp. Make sure you subscribe too, because we're also uploading the interviews like we were just talking about. We heard from Cam Davis, also Justin Cryer, to Mike Norvell as well, of course. But that's on our channel here. So after we get done with our live, if you want to go listen to those or go check them out, definitely go hit that subscribe button and you'll show up on your feed. So then you don't have to try to search us all the time. But yeah, let's keep moving here to the defensive line and some weight changes, ladies and gentlemen. Daryl Jackson, we'll start off with your starter at nose tackle, 330 pounds to 337. Good Lord. Added 7 pounds in total. Jaden Jones, he went from 240 to 253, 13-pound increase there. James Williams, 250 to 262. Tyland Coleman, 285 to 301. Kevin MF and Wynn went from 320 to 343. God almighty. 23-pound increase there. And then the one that, we're having a competition, a battle here between LeJesse Harold and Tylon Lee. Who's going to get on the field more, all that kind of stuff. I know there was a lot of praise for Tylon Lee. He said he was gaining a ton of weight. He had put on 30+. He sure did. He went from 245 to 277. But it's a straight-up battle right now with LeJesse Harold, too, as another true freshman. 215 to 247, a 32-pound increase as well. Those two guys just going at it in the weight room, and not just weight room. You got to eat a lot of food for this to be happening. And then both the brothers, Mandrell and Daryl. Yep, the brothers. Those two, 240 to 265 for Mandrell, 25-pound increase, and then Daryl Desir, 240 to 261, a 21-pound increase. I don't know if I've seen such a significant increase in one unit, and a majority of these guys being true freshmen coming in. And, Mike Norvell's tenure, more specifically, too, in the trenches here. I think this is really impressive. It's also got to do with what Tony White likes to do defensively. Some guys going to have to work with their body and change some things up. getting out of that previous scheme of that ran under Adam Fuller. But my goodness, where do we start, man? I mean, this defensive line unit has put on some size going into this spring, D'Lo.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to throw any water on the fire, but I mean, I'm just imagining, whenever these guys arrived at Florida State, they didn't take their measurements. They took their measurements from the recruiting sites and stuff. And then this was maybe their first official measure in at Florida State. And that's why you're seeing such a drastic increase. I mean, 23 pounds, 32 pounds, 32 pounds, 25 pounds, 21 pounds. And we're talking about in a period of, since that first week of January or so, about what, 9 weeks, give or take. I mean, that's just absolutely insane. So I mean, a little bit hard to believe, but they've definitely put on some weight since they got to FSU. And man, I mean, the sky is the limit for a lot of those guys, and Kevin Wynn in particular. Maybe going to get into a role for Florida State in 2025. And then you look at some of these guys coming back. I mean, Darrell Jackson continuing to add on the pounds. The big one for me is James Williams going from that 250 to 262, because even when you saw him in that introductory press conference, I mean, he didn't look like he was 250. He didn't necessarily look like a defensive end. So I think it's important for him to continue bulking up, continue adding that size and maturing his frame. And that was something that defensive line coach Terrence Knighton, I mean, continued to rave about during the spring luncheon. James Williams putting on that size, and with that extra size coming on, I mean, he's got to putting himself in a position to be an every down defensive end at Florida State rather than just maybe a pass rushing specialist like he was at Nebraska.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the size is really good. Definitely, if you're gonna have to go against a guy like Micah Pettis, who's 355 in camp, but when you get out to Saturdays, you're gonna have that strength for sure. And Terrence Knight talked about it too, I believe, at the luncheon, saying Darrell Jackson's gonna be the best defensive tackle. He could be the best defensive tackle in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And he's thought very, very high of Darrell Jackson. I mean, that goes all the way back to when Darrell was going to go with Joshua Farmer and putting his name into the NFL draft and then going ahead to the pros. But Florida State meeting with Darrell Jackson during that whole process and getting him back was really important for what Tony White and Terrence Knighton wanted to do in that defensive line. First off, they really needed Darrell Jackson. Needed somebody to come in there with some experience anyways, and be interested to see if they do any more additions. We'll see how spring goes, but if they want to add some more experience in that defensive line. But with some of these true freshmen coming in, it's been really good to see the size they put on. And Kevin Wynn's already a big boy, but going there to 343, I mean, that's a lot of weight. But like I said, a lot of this goes in the spring. You add on a lot of size, you add on the muscle now, you trim it down once you get into the fall. So that's why you're going to see some heavy increases into some of these big men. But LeJesse Harold's someone that I said, and we talked about it, he's got to put on size, and he's at 247. That's really, really nice. And Tylon Lee just loves the weight room, as he's told the media, and he's at 277. Like that's what you need. That's what you need,
especially for LeJesse, because you think about it, Florida State, they've had some defensive ends come in over the years who started off their careers on the lighter side, like Harold around that 215-pound mark. You look at a guy, that just transferred out from the program a couple of months ago, in Lamont Green Jr. He just wasn't able to pack on that weight over the 2 years that he was at Florida State. And then you look at Harold, and you're talking over a 30-pound difference at 8 weeks. So, I mean, that's just – it's nuts. I mean, it makes no sense.
Yeah, it doesn't. Then let's jump over to linebacker to finish this off. At least noticeable for me is Omar Graham Jr. He goes from 228 to 235. You could definitely see it in some of those walk-in videos to practice today, and looks good with that weight, I'd say. And then Blake Nicholson, always one that we keep a close eye on, someone that since arriving has needed to put on size, but he's gone from 224 to 229, a 5-pound increase there as well. And, did anything, from John Papuchis coming from the luncheon, did anything come out really interesting from him, or any scoop that you got from that luncheon?
Not necessarily. I mean, mainly just talking about his transition over to the linebacker group, and obviously didn't coach them necessarily at Florida State, but already very familiar with Omar Graham Jr., Blake Nicholson, and Justin Cryer, and what they bring to the table. And then, excited about what Stephon Thompson, Elijah Herring, and Caleb Lavalley can bring to this unit and kind of help them get to that next level. And, what I guess maybe what stood out a little bit is, and this was brought up by Terrence Knighton as well, but they said Elijah Herring going to work a little bit on the defensive line at one of those defensive end positions. Can't remember the exact name. I can't remember. I think it was the jack position over there on the defensive line. So that'll be something interesting to watch, seeing him show off his versatility a little bit.
Well, I think they need to find a linebacker that can blitz well and bring pressure. I just felt like that lacked a ton last year. They didn't really have that. They had no one that could really pull that off for you. But that's someone that I wish, or a factor that I wish we could be viewing, at the camp to be able to, tell to you guys on, or that can they find someone that can play that role, because it's a big need in this day of football overall, both college football and in the league itself. But you can really get away with more things on the collegiate side as it's more amateurish. So you can bring a lot of blitzes, definitely can affect the quarterback play of your opponent. Can also grab a lot of TFLs. Just, I want to see more of that. I would like to see a little bit more of aggressive play, because it felt like that just kind of was lost a little bit. Or if you had aggressive play, guys would not take advantage of the opportunity, and got to see a lot more play in that regard, in my opinion.
That's something, Tony White wants to bring to the table. And I think you look at this linebacker room. I mean, they've, for the most part, added a decent amount of size. Omar Graham Jr., Blake Nicholson, Justin Cryer, all continuing to improve their bodies. You've got the two very experienced transfers coming in, Stephon Thompson and Elijah Herring, who maybe, are a little bit closer to their potential as far as where their bodies can go, but they bring that experience. And then Caleb Lavalley, still has a pretty high ceiling in front of him. So I think, like we talked about last week on the preview, there's a lot to like about this linebacker unit and the potential of how good it could be for Florida State in 2025.
Mm-hmm. Well, unless you have anything more, D-Lou, from the first day of spring practices, I think that's going to wrap it up for this show. Anything else you got there?
I think the only other thing, you didn't go through the DB weight changes, but some of the guys that Mike Norvell mentioned as standouts today, as you can see on these weight changes, they did pretty well for themselves during the tour of duty. Earl Little Jr. Going from 186 to 193 pounds, a gain of 7. Then you've got Edwin Joseph from 190 to 198 plus 8 pounds, and Jabril Rawls 176 pounds to 185 pounds. So he's putting on 9 pounds. Some good size in that defensive back room. I think it just shows, how hard those guys are working over the offseason. And then final thing, just going back to Mike Norvell's press availability, but, had some high remarks for Squirrel White and Deuce Robinson in their first day of practice, and just kind of the edge that they're bringing, and already knowing the type of impact that they want to make at Florida State. I mean, they want to instantly, be playmakers for the Seminoles in 2025. And we're going to see how it goes over the next couple of weeks for Florida State, a Seminole team that is in a lot of transitions on offense and defense, but there's a lot of talent and a lot of belief in this team, and we'll see if they're able to turn it around under this revamped coaching staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, first day of spring practice. No, you couldn't get in there, and the rest of our staff couldn't, but we're going to try our best to give you the best coverage across the board on the site, NoleGameday.com, and then here on the YouTube channel with our live shows. And like I said earlier, tons of interviews going up here on this channel. So make sure you stay tuned. Hit the like button before you leave here. Definitely appreciate it. Moving forward, always feel free to throw in some topics or questions into the chat, and we will be sure to bring them up here, and we'll discuss further for you guys. But with that, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Hear the Spear. We'll talk to you at some point next week. We'll see what your time fits best with all the practice schedule going on and everything. But we will see you next week, another episode. But enjoy the rest of y'all's week, and we'll see you soon. Peace.